Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the 2019 Mindfulness and Education Summit. It's day 5, Culture Transformation. I'm Chris McKenna. I'm the Program Officer of Education at mindful.org and the former Program Director of Mindful Schools. Today, we're going to be looking at system-wide implementation with Barnaby Spring. And Barnaby is the Director of Mindfulness and Education in the New York City Department of Education. And what we're going to be doing in a way is kind of giving you a North Star for what a fully developed Department of Education level program can look like in what is now hundreds of different schools. Without further ado, Barnaby Spring, and I think just what I want to lead with, Barnaby, is just walking us through, like, it's probably news to somebody that you can be a mindfulness and education director in a district. Like, that's kind of crazy for those of us who have been at this for a while, that you would ever see a district acknowledge the need for a mindfulness coordinator. So maybe introduce yourself, your kind of pathway into that role, and yeah, just anything you want to say by way of your own background, how you got to where you are now.
Great. Well, first of all, just thank you to the powers that be and to you. I'm just grateful to have some time just to be with you. It's wonderful to hear the NYC DOE referred to as a district, because actually we have about, I don't know, 30 to 40 districts. We have 5 boroughs.
It's a city, not a district.
We have 1,800 schools, 5 boroughs, and I think this is something that I think our listeners will help folks understand. As I actually got this from you, Chris, what's really going on here? The phrase itself, the question itself. So what's really going on here in the New York City Department of Education? You know, I came to teaching in the New York City Department of Education in the mid-90s and started as a teacher. And I can say that in the mid-90s in New York City, teachers working in different pockets or silos within this massive system were bringing in, at that time, yoga was sort of the big thing that was coming into public education, and different teachers were bringing in yoga and were bringing in meditation or mindfulness. And it really is something that we know has been emerging in the New York City Department of Education for the last 30 to 40 years, really. And I came to this, having been a teacher for 7 years, having been a principal for 6 years, having been a central administrator for about another 4 or 5 years, to meeting the first deputy chancellor now, who was then coming in as the head of a borough support center. And for listeners, and maybe for you, Chris, this is where it gets a little tedious, because such a massive system, somebody who's coming in to lead one area of Brooklyn, sort of, if you, in a general way, thinking half of the schools in Brooklyn, it's like 5 or 6, maybe even more districts. And so that person was Cheryl Watson Harris, who I was on her team, and she is now the first deputy chancellor, which is sort of the person who's in charge of running the school system or overseeing the school system. She's the chancellor's, number one, or, right-hand man, or, but at that time, about 6 years ago, she really tasked me, when she was the executive director of a smaller borough center, to see what was happening with with mindfulness in just an area of New York City schools. And we immediately saw a continuum of schools just in Brooklyn South, of schools that had been implementing yoga and mindfulness programs for 10 years, schools that had been doing it for 5 years, schools that had been doing it for 2 or 3 years and were saying, we don't know if we understand what we're doing. Can you give us supports and resources? And schools that were saying, what is mindfulness and how is it going to help us out? So we knew that this was emerging in our system. And so 6 years ago, this big, vast New York City Department of Education system began to become mindful of mindfulness in its own system. It was almost like a whole system began to sort of say, what is this? What's going on here? And we began to get all the stories, and we're still in the process of hearing what our schools, our teachers, our students, our principals, our superintendents are telling us about the impact of this work on the social, emotional, and academic and leadership learning of not just our students, but of everyone, adults, leaders in the system. Now, we began to realize this, and then something else happened. A man named Richard Carranza came to New York City to become the chancellor of the New York City Department of Education. And this brave gentleman took a very mindful look at the New York City school system, and after taking a very the entry sort of look or investigation. It's called a listening tour. What's the state of the city? How does he see it from where he stands as our new chancellor? And at the end of that, he very courageously and simply said, there are so many inequities in the system that I have to tell you, you're the most segregated school system in the country. And that level of honesty and simplicity sort of dovetailed with something that's sort of essential about the kind of dialogue that begins to happen as a process of students and teachers and principals practicing mindfulness together, that very quickly it became clear that we had a champion for mindfulness in education that was going to encourage us to get a better understanding of this. And so that's how this position, Director of Mindfulness, which had never existed before, came to be. It's really because a city system discovered that there was literally a need for a workflow for this from Central in order for the system itself to respond mindfully to the emergence of mindfulness in its school system.
Yeah, it's great. It's a great kind of summary of the history. I think where I want to go from there, it's like, and probably any administrators listening to this can relate. It's like it's like this cornucopia. You've got schools in all these different places. You've got people with year 10 programs and people with like no mindfulness or social emotional learning at all. And they're all kind of swimming in the soup together.
Right.
So I guess one thing I want to just bring out in the beginning is like the kind of the glue, it's because I know that you've done a lot of work in that realm, and the kind of networking function and getting people who are usually in silos communicating with each other on best practices. So if you could just say a little bit about that. You kind of walk in, and what do you see, and how do you start helping people in that regard?
Right. So, as you said, this phrase, breaking down silos, was sort of nurtured by the chancellor who was in place before Richard Carranza, Carmen Farina. So throughout the city, people were being encouraged, even before Chancellor Carranza came, to begin to step out of their silos. This gentleman installed my boss, Cheryl Watson Harris. He he moved her into the position of the first deputy chancellor. And then Cheryl turned around and said, "You're the director of mindfulness. We have to now do what you've just described, Chris. We have to find out what is the glue that's making this happen." So one of the things we did is began to really reach out to the senior leadership. And the way we did this was we entered a partnership with the Kripalu Institute, which is up in the Berkshires, which is a partner to New York City, really. And they partnered with us and have been donating to us free opportunities for principals on up, for principals, directors, managers, superintendents, deputy superintendents, to attend a leadership resiliency training that the Kripalu Center has developed, the Kripalu Institute. Now, this was, at the beginning, we believed this was an opportunity for our superintendents and our executive superintendents to learn a little bit more about yoga and mindfulness for themselves. What happened was that they came back and started telling us, me, about the various yoga and mindfulness programs that they had going on in the city. And that's when we began to realize that there was actually an informal network, if you could put it that way, a grounds up kind of design that was emerging in and of itself. And that our job would be to begin to develop mindful places within this structure, because we didn't want to interfere. The one thing that I will praise this chancellor, first deputy chancellor, for is like, let's not interfere with what's here. We're not going to do anything from the top down. We're not going to call this, we're not going to all of a sudden say that we've discovered mindfulness in education. We're going to very purposefully examine what exactly exists here. And so what we have now are mindfulness leads, and I don't know if this answers your question, mindfulness leads that are stationed in each of the borough citywide offices, who are in the process not only of providing introductory presentations on mindfulness, which I have developed over the years, and we work with them on doing these simple presentations that don't require them to really have a mindfulness practice, but to simply be able to provide the information. And we're also have developed these mindfulness intensives. Now, mindfulness intensives are 4 full days, not in a row, because teachers or counselors or social workers or principals even can't leave their schools for 4 days in a row. But a mindfulness intensive are 4 full days where we really methodically move through, and it's in a general way. The first day is all about mindfulness for self-care, stress management, and understanding mindfulness just in terms of many of the issues around our own personal lives with stress. The second day is how would we begin to think about mindfulness applications applied just to ourselves in the classroom or in the work area. So we're not even talking to children about mindfulness at this point. We are just giving teachers the strategies and a lot of information. We're also giving them time and space to ask a lot of their own questions. We are working with professionally licensed pedagogues who know a lot about writing curriculum, and many of our teachers are self-identifying themselves, saying, this is really happening. I've been practicing mindfulness for 10 years or yoga for 10 years. So that's sort of how we're beginning to understand the glue that's there. We're not putting any glue there. We're just, it's like the thing that Adrienne Marie Brown says in her book, Emergent Strategies, what you pay attention to grows. And so we're just beginning to pay attention centrally in a formal way to what is there. And as we do these mindfulness intensives, these introductory mindfulness, introduction to mindfulness presentations, the opportunities for principals and superintendents to investigate how yoga and mindfulness is not only a social emotional learning strategy, but a holistic approach to health and wellness, but also a holistic approach to developing the capacity of awareness that translates into academic performance and social engagement, and we are really right at that place, Chris, where we don't know what's going to happen next in terms of what we're discovering and what the possibilities are.
It's beautiful, man. It's beautiful to hear where it's come, you know.
I hope I'm describing it clearly enough.
No, it's very clear. And what I just to interject, I want to drill down into some of the initiatives, but just for the listeners, I want to just pause and just pounce on a couple of things you said, just so people can take it in. One is the idea of using off-site facilities and partners to actually get stakeholders and school leaders together in an intimate way.
Oh,
you know, which you described with the Kripalu partnership, but I want to highlight that just for everybody listening. Barnaby's experience and that of many other people we know in this field really suggests that any offsite time that you can garner with people that matter around this work, with skilled facilitators really introducing this material, it's worth 5 years of advocacy kind of within brown bag lunches and little 5-minute presentations, taking people out of the context that they're in and dropping them into that other space. It's just,
absolutely.
Barnaby is like a pro at this, but I want to highlight that for the rest of you, that's a tool in the toolbox for really moving the agenda forward with this stuff. Second thing that, and some of you might, you know, Barnaby went into describing, he's got a number of professional development initiatives. One of them is this kind of 4-day introduction to mindfulness. But what I want to highlight here and invite him to describe a little more, what's interesting about Barnaby's work from my point of view is that for years, people have basically been buying curriculum from the outside or turning to outside providers in some way. And one of the things that makes Barnaby and his community kind of revolutionary is that they have basically started some version of their own in-house training within a Department of Education. So they're no longer going outside to kind of patchwork in different programs, although there's still obviously some of that. But there's also this sense that the Department of Education itself becomes responsible for fostering stuff. So I'm wondering, there's a number of things you're doing in that realm, and I'm wondering if you could kind of, we've done the professional development days, what's some of the other initiatives like with the kids, and I know there's a lot going on there.
You said it. I mean, this brings me to the big baby that's happening right now, is that as this grows, elected officials in New York City become interested, particularly borough presidents. So one of the things, and Chris, you're absolutely right, we have incredibly talented outside providers available to us. I always say on a global level, we have global outside providers who we can reach out to, people like Mindful Schools, for instance, who I think is as an organization that provides supports all over the country. But then we have local providers. But one of the things that I saw immediately was that also the social emotional learning emergence thing was also leading to all kinds of outside providers around social emotional learning that are not cheap. And I extended myself to the chancellor, to the first deputy chancellor, with the idea that we create and develop an in-house yoga and mindfulness teacher preparation program. In other words, teachers were spending thousands of dollars to go to these yoga teacher trainings and mindfulness teacher trainings, which are great, but not everybody can afford them. And this chancellor, Richard Carranza, is really championing advancing equity. And that's a perfect example of how some people can go to a yoga teacher training or to a mindfulness teacher training, but some of our educators cannot. And so my argument was, let's create an in-house yoga and mindfulness teacher training program. And the chancellor agreed, and the borough president of Brooklyn, Eric Adams, agreed. And these two gentlemen, along with the first deputy chancellor, I keep on talking about leadership here, don't I? I keep on coming back to these people at the top who clear the runway or who make it possible for these things to happen.
Well, I think it's important because it's like it's how things actually get done. That's kind of part of what we're trying to illustrate here.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I want to say. And don't be surprised when you reach out to your senior leadership or your elected officials and find out that they too know a lot about this mindfulness and yoga. Eric Adams was way ahead of us and ready to help us, and the chancellor, who also is familiar with the practice of meditation and mindfulness, they embraced this because they understood the cost effectiveness of this in terms of a healthcare, almost a preventive healthcare initiative. And so that's one of the major structures that we're in the process of developing. And the idea behind that is that we would have a structure, the New York City Department of Education yoga and mindfulness teacher preparation program, but also an academy. And the really deep goal there is to create a space within public education so that teachers who are really identifying these strategies of yoga and mindfulness, particularly and only secular, non-sectarian practices of yoga and mindfulness that are not, it can't be conflated with a religious approach or can't be confused with the religious approach, and that are not controversial, but are actually easily accessible in terms of the simplicity of the practice, and are, at this point, we can say, thoroughly confirmed by scientific research and evidence-based, and also something that our own teachers can adopt to do their own action research. So now we're in a situation where a number of stakeholders, from the chancellor and elected officials to our pre-K kids, our pre-K students, who are telling us that the very simple things that they're learning about, 2 minutes of learning mindfulness a day or a mindfulness moment is helping them when they wake up in the middle of night to put themselves back to sleep so that mom and dad don't lose a night of sleep, or that our kids are being able to manage anxiety, or that our middle school students are saying, that the mindfulness program that's in their school helped one student who I just heard tell this story the other day. Mindfulness helped him to realize that he doesn't want to be a bully, but that he can't stop being a bully. That awareness in a child, to have a direct, valid experience of her or himself realizing, I never really wanted to be a bully, I'm bullying, and we get into the brain research and we help the child understand, well, guess what? It's really not your fault, your brain, and we teach about the brain. Neuroscience is a very important aspect of this. And these kids, once we basically empower them with the knowledge that's right out there, they get excited about it. Next thing, parents are saying, my little Johnny is not bullying his brother and sister. What's going on here? Can I learn some of this for myself? And so it's sort of like a simultaneous process of developing structures to support the ongoing cultivation of this work, while also listening. We need to be the listeners. We are not the experts on mindfulness.
Yes.
We need to listen to what our children and our parents and our teachers what they say to us, what our principals tell us about what's happening in their schools. And yeah, there are some loose guidelines. We're not about religion, so forget that. And be purposeful in making sure you bring in programs that cannot in any way be confused with, or no controversy around something that you're bringing in. And now we're at a point in the country, thanks to organizations like Mindful Schools, but also many other programs. I always forget how to say Daniel's last name.
Rechtschaffen.
Okay, sorry, Daniel, but Daniel's written a great book. Patricia Jennings has written a great book. Trauma-informed, sensitive, trauma-sensitive class.
Yeah. Patricia's latest book. She's in this. Also, David Trelevin, your friend, is also going to be speaking.
Listen,
for this year.
I have not met David yet, but he's like you. He's going to be in trouble once I meet him, because I'm just going to want to sit down and talk to this guy, because as we do the mindfulness intensives, Chris, and I want the folks to think about this, something else is beginning to happen. When you give professional educators space and time to be together, whether you're taking them and dropping them in the Berkshires at the Kripalu Institute, or whether you're just giving them space and time within the city to be together, practice some strategies of mindfulness, and they experience that kind of disarming process where it's like, by practicing mindfulness itself, you've sort of created a mindful space where people feel safe to have honest, authentic conversations with one another about what's really happening here. Coming back to that question, what's really going on here? And so not only are our teachers learning strategies for mindfulness, but they're having a kind of dialogue and discourse with each other around some of the deeper issues that we have to come to terms with if we are truly going to desegregate the most segregated school system in the country. And what do you think the kinds of conversations are about?
So you're answering my next question, which was basically what you just said. It's, relating, in some sense, it's like, how can mindfulness be a ground for working some of the other systemic issues we have? And so, like, I'd like to hear a little bit more about that. And, one thing that always comes to me is that there's so many of us that have been involved in restorative practices and alternatives to discipline, or even just trying to get the staff themselves to look more closely at assumptions and bias. And it strikes me that this is very charged work. It's like, to quote Mickey Kashtan, an NVC trainer, a lot of school environments or cultures we've made, these are low trust environments.
Oh.
We have not built a culture where people are really used to speaking and listening on a kind of deep level. So I guess just any reflections you have on that and the role mindfulness can play in that, any kind of other thoughts are welcome.
Well, we're right there. You've just brought us right to the very heart. And I almost feel like this Chancellor Richard Carranza, who will say to you, listen, I'm a Mexican-American born in Arizona. I'm not going to apologize for the fact that I'm a Mexican-American man in this country today. And so therefore, I'm going to offer anti-bias trainings to all of the officials and the adults. I'm offering trainings in anti-bias. Now, that in and of itself is an incredible mindful action, but does it rock the system? Does that little thing, that little step of a one-day training in anti-bias have a serious impact on a city? Absolutely. And so I'm not the only one who's addressing this, but we do know that these anti-bias trainings are well served by infusing aspects of these trainings with mindfulness. And that we know from the mindfulness trainings that when teachers engage in mindfulness or have some time to practice some yoga strategies and sort of get to just stretch and breathe together in a room and then not walk away, but stay there. And so, take a break, enjoy conversation, but are also reflecting. They come back and they want to have a deeper conversation because there's a wound there. I mean, we're being very clear in New York City. These mindfulness and yoga intensives are being framed as breathing into a healed city, or breathing, feeling, healing. The word healing is coming up quite a bit. Chris, recently we're dealing with the fact that our New York City police officers are committing suicide. And so the borough president, Eric Adams, but a number of people are realizing a lot of people in New York City, a lot of our public servants need strategies to come to terms with the stress. But you're also correct in saying that it's not just about mindfulness to keep everybody calm and compliant and feeling calm and safe, but it's also mindfulness to help people say, what are the questions that we really need to start asking on a deeper level about what is causing this stress? What is it systemically that's causing this stress? What is it, the chancellor has said in public that, the system isn't broken, it's doing exactly what it's been designed to do or has been allowed to do. And so it's a combination of things. It's mindfulness emerging with a kind of consciousness, I feel, emerging in people, particularly in light of our climate march. That I don't know when your folks are seeing this, but this just happened yesterday in our world, where our own children are telling us how mindless we are and how much we need to become mindful of a wounded planet. So that's how we're beginning to frame this. All of a sudden, I'm sitting here saying, "Have I lost the?"
No, it's that was it, man. That was a good tie together. I know that's so. In the way that you all think about it, I know that there's so much intertwining between the bias work and the mindfulness.
Oh, I know what I wanted.
I just wanted to bring that out for people.
Right. What I wanted to say is that we have recently articulated in the New York City Department of Education a social, or what we call a supportive environment framework. And this is coming out of the first Deputy Chancellor for Climate and Wellness. Now, this is not the Deputy Chancellor, Cheryl Watson Harris, the first Deputy Chancellor, Cheryl Watson Harris. This is another Deputy Chancellor who's in charge of helping us come to terms with the culture and climate of our system and the wellness of our system. That would be LaShawn Robinson. And her team has articulated for the city what we call a supportive environment framework. And this is specifically to begin to really put social emotional needs of children in a place where it's just as important, if not more important, than academic learning. Now that is a flip. We've always been in this country about academic learning and certainly the social emotional needs of our kids, but academics. And somehow we're beginning to realize that, and this is not my phrase, I know our chancellor says this often, but culture eats strategy for breakfast. And I think that there's a leading speaker who says that culture eats your academic plans for breakfast. And what I said is that if culture eats your academic plans for breakfast, trauma eats your culture for breakfast, lunch, dinner, and midnight snacks. And right. We have, I say that many of our teachers report to me in these mindfulness intensives, we're lucky if our kids come to us on a low hum of post-traumatic stress syndrome. And the system is just waking up to this issue of adverse childhood experiences. I don't know if you've seen the film Resilience that recently came out, but this is a film that's not talking about the problems that the children have. These are the adverse childhood experiences that are in the minds and hearts and bodies of the adults. And adults having these realities of incredible wounds in their bodies that haven't been addressed or healed actually get played out again on the children in the school.
Yeah.
So the trauma isn't necessarily happening in the streets. The trauma could actually be happening in the schools. And if you think I'm positing an argument that is made up, go watch that film. They're describing this as a national health issue, that the adults not being able to come to terms with the adverse childhood experiences of their childhood is leading to heart disease, early death, alcoholism, drug addiction, things that many of us who've been in this work have known for quite some time, but that now is really being confirmed by science.
So the film, for those of you who missed it, it's called Resilience. You can Google that. It is quite good. It's a good primer on it, on ACEs, as Barnaby said. Okay, what I want to do just in this last period, we've set the stage here. That there's one more bit of housekeeping I want to do on your programs, and that's has to do with the youth, actually. And you and I have talked about this before, but one of my things is that one of the ways that social emotional learning and mindfulness stay top down is that their level of youth involvement in the curriculum remains quite low. You know, even when kids are given a lot of time to speak and share, it's like they're not, like most things in our educational context, they're given no ownership. So it kind of, you know, it's like, and there's a few exceptions, that Holistic Life in Baltimore, who actually has youth that did their program that are now teachers. But what strikes me about that example and a few others is that in a weird way, they're almost creating a livelihood pathway. Not like it's going to be the only thing, but just this idea, just this idea that you can do this thing and it can be part of your repertoire. And I know that you've been kind of thinking along the same lines. So I just wanted to have you spell that out a little bit for people as a possibility.
Chris, I'm just going to say I love hanging out with you. I love talking to you. I love having a conversation with, and I'm sure people in the audience will appreciate what I've just said. We're talking about a field that's emerging in this country, and it's so exciting and gratifying when you have an opportunity to talk about the things that people like Chris and other people can draw out of you. So I have to say that, listen, we discovered last year, Chris, that we have a high school in the New York City Department of Education that has a yoga teacher training program for students. And that because we're such a big city, we're still finding about the innovative, creative, powerfully effective things that people are doing. Curtis High School in Staten Island had partnered with a yoga studio, a local yoga studio, and said, listen, we have a hard time getting our kids to participate in physical education as it stands within the Western model of education. We're thinking we'd like to offer them a track of taking yoga, but we're also thinking that we'll tell them that if they complete a 200-hour course, that we'll partner with the Yoga Alliance, and by the time they graduate, they can graduate as certified yoga instructors in the same way as a kid can be a certified lifeguard. And sure enough, this year, we're going to be exploring how we might expand this because, listen, I don't know about you, but I was in high school you know, you went to gym, you had to get in these tennis shoes, you had to get in New York City, you know, physical education's a different, depending on where you are, it's a very diverse city. But we're finding that our kids are very interested in yoga and that they love the idea of being able to learn about anatomy and the respiratory system and you know how the bones and the muscles work in a way that really is a very deep kind of not only physical education, but it's also having them walk out with something they can put on a resume that leads to employment. So there's that. But the other thing about student voice, now you're talking about my specific team, and I have to say that I work on the Student Support Services team in the Office of the First Deputy Chancellor. So I'm a Student Services Director, and I work with other Student Services Directors on my team. We are led by Dr. Deborah Lamb, who is the Senior Student Services Director, but also in charge of community partnerships. But we're just now in the process of really settling into what our game plan is going to be for the rest of the year. And it rests on student voice, student choice, and student empowerment. So we recently had an event. I don't think we'll ever be having an event around yoga or mindfulness where our own students in the DOE aren't leading mindfulness or leading yoga or telling us from their own lives why this is so important to them.
I mean, that's really important, even in working with parent communities, right? You know, it's like it's not just some staff member up there. It's like the actual youth are showing the practices and talking about the meanings. And I know you do a lot of that. So I want to
Well, I
highlight
have to
that
tell
for
you,
people.
the one thing that I'm missing and that I feel really obliged to talk about is it's gotten so deep and we're starting to get so structurally good at supporting this that it makes it possible for us to go out and extend deeper and deeper into the whole 5-borough community, the system of our schools. So that we have one school, Vista Academy Middle School in Brooklyn, where we discovered a teacher by the name of Curtis Smith, who, in working with his Principal Addo, and with the district superintendent of this district in Brooklyn, Thomas McBride, I'm going to say this, they've developed a culturally responsive model for mindfulness in education. And my question to the people out there is, in the same way that Christopher Emdin wrote in his book for white folks, Teaching Kids in the Hood, and all the rest of you all too, which is a transformational book, which is helping a lot of people understand the importance of a culturally responsive approach to education. You just can't come up with your models for teaching children that you've had in the university. You have to engage with students and find out about who they are, because we want a culturally responsive, sustained education for our kids. And guess what? We want the same thing for mindfulness and yoga too. Because another big challenge, and you wanted to talk about some of the pitfalls or challenges. One of the challenges is, how do we decolonize mindfulness? Or do we need to even talk about that? Because I've got some superintendents in some of their superintendencies where they're saying, Barnaby, we know what mindfulness is. We know how mindfulness is talked about. But, you know, in our culture, in our tradition, whether it be from Africa or whether it be from, South America, we understand what this is about. We call it different things, and we use different ways and methods and techniques to get there. And that's what's also very exciting, because that's when we have to bring in some of the work of people like Dr. Ellen Langer of Harvard University, who talks about mindfulness without meditation. You know, mindfulness is a form of noticing and appreciating. So again, in the same way that mindfulness is the groundwork for some of the anti-bias training, we see mindfulness as a powerful foundational ground for culturally responsive teaching. not only of teaching and yoga, but of any other content area.
Okay, so here we're going to try to tie this together.
Okay.
Kind of last question. We've got people listening to this at all sorts of different stages of development with their program. You probably looked at hundreds of schools now with programs that are fledgling all the way to developed, probably a bunch of programs that fail or peter out. If you had to give a few principles or pointers or reminders to the audience about how to hold the development of a mindfulness and education program in a school, what would you emphasize to them? What is like the North Stars that you would not want them to forget?
Because some North Stars have appeared and made themselves very vivid in the last 2 months. Here's a North Star. Grow this in your school community. Grow it. Take the simple practice of mindfulness. This simple place, this thing of almost so simple that it's, how can this be so simple? Of simply examining what happens when people come together, are silent, still, focusing on their breathing. What happens when you just allow that time and space to take root in your community? Now, what I'm saying, the North Star is, yes, there are outside providers. Yes, there are many approaches. Yes. But you, Mr. Principal, you, my brother teacher, or you're a professional. You've been writing curriculum for years. You've been showing up for kids for years. Just give yourself time and space to see how this wants to grow and be embodied in your own community. We in public education in the West, we get excited about things, and so we'll go buy something. What we've been trained to do that. Is there a problem? Let's have 2 professional trainings. Let's buy a packaged program. And one of the things that happened was one of our superintendents was told that he had to have a social emotional learning initiative for his district. And he reached out to his executive superintendent, and there was some kind of an SEL program that certainly has a great reputation, but it's not cheap. And he said, I'd rather take the money, and I've spoken to all my principals, and they say they want to do this too. We'd rather just work with the team within the New York City Department of Education that's developing this mindfulness work, which, by the way, is based on the institutional expertise of our teachers who have been doing this work, and come up with something that's going to save us a lot of money, that we're going to be able to own and apply to the issues in our own school, so it'll be our product. And, it's, by the way, inspiring parents to want to be a part of the program, teachers to be a part of the program, and kids to be part of the program. The North Star is embody this practice, make it your own. Don't buy something that comes in for 8 weeks and you have the teacher in the classroom while somebody comes and does the program. And I know I'm taking a risk here because it may sound like I'm saying you don't need outside providers. Well, you do, because we're not there yet within our own system. And we have some brilliant outside providers. But don't think for a second that if you just have an 8-week program and somebody comes in and then leaves, that all of a sudden that means mindfulness is going to flourish in your school. I have stories of teachers, who 3 weeks after the program has come into their school, they're banging on that singing bowl, telling the kids to shut up and sit down and practice mindfulness while they grade papers. That's not how you want to do it.
Yeah. Slow and embodied.
Move slow to move fast. And please, let's not be ashamed of embodied practice.
Yes.
Don't make it a voluntold. Here's a North Star. It's not a rollout. Here's a North Star. It's not a top-down initiative. Here's a North Star. You say to the teachers who aren't interested in it, fine, you don't have to do it. We're offering this, first of all, for you to investigate. And then you tell us. Chris, I'm literally at the point now where I say to people, to the teachers in the rooms, I say, if you investigate this and at the end of this intensive, come back to me and say, Barnaby, this is crap, then I'm going to go tell the Dalai Lama and Chris McKenna and all the people, this is crap. But what's happening here is that I'm being mindful about mindfulness in education. There's a North Star. Be mindful about mindfulness in education and introduce this to the people in the room who really know what this work means in terms of having a relationship of trust and confidence with a child.
Barnaby Spring, you heard it here first. Director of Mindfulness in Education, New York City Department of Education. Thank you so much, my friend, for your time and wisdom.
Was a brilliant and compassionate way to tell me that I have to be quiet now.
Ah!
Because when I'm with you, Chris, and when I'm with your colleague, Megan Cowan, and when I'm with other people who are doing this work, it's like we're on a surfboard and we're riding a wave, and we keep on thinking the wave is going to end, but this wave keeps on, it's getting bigger, and we just all have to help each other stay on the surfboard.
Beautiful, man. With that, we'll sign off, and yeah, our listeners can stay tuned. There's more to day 5 and more to the summit. So happy learning, and thanks a lot, Barnaby.
Grateful to be of service.